Greetings everybody, welcome back to my 7-part series of running an adventure path. This time we are on episode 4, which is about balance, and specifically about balancing encounters. There are various ways that you can do that. It's kind of written in a few books here and there. So let's take a deep dive into how you balance an adventure path, which is a little bit differently. So the first thing you need to know is an adventure path is generally written for a party of 4 players. If you have more or less, you may need to do some adjustments. You can maybe get by with 5 players with very minimum adjustment, which we'll come back to on that. And if you have 6 or more players, definitely need to start to do some adjusting, not only in terms of the encounters, the enemies, as well as the loot. The loot might not be able to keep up with that amount of people in the party. On the flip side, if you have 3 players, you may need to tone down some of the stuff to give the players some help. 5, like I said before, you could get away with. This depends a bit more on your party. Depending on how the adventure path or campaign may be written, it's usually written for like your average players. So not like if you have a party of like 5 min-maxers who they are just, maximize stats, they know all the best spells, everything. You may need to beef it up to give them a real challenge. But if you don't have that many like heavy min-maxers in a group, it's very minimum adjustment you have to do. So, what kind of adjustments can we do? Well, the first one is the debate between buffing a creature or adding more creatures. Now, buffing a creature is generally a mixed bag in terms of is that worth doing, because it can make combat a bit more of a slog. If you just make every enemy a big damage sponge that can just soak up damage, they'll be fighting something forever. And nobody likes that. Combat gets boring if that's the case. However, and this time I'll use some examples from Pathfinder, but I'm sure other systems have similar concepts of quick adjustments to creature stats. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, we have a weak adjustment and an elite adjustment. An elite mob is basically just the same creature with a little bit more stats. And the weak one is a little bit less stats. So these are quick adjustments that aren't too terrible to it's not like you're doubling someone's HP. It's not like, it's a little bit more damage and a little bit more hit points. Just enough to maybe make them, hit a little bit harder, squeak out some more damage. That's one way you can do. The weak adjustment is a good way for if you have a party of 3 to go down that way as well. As for the more mobs theory, this one is generally considered good and bad in that it makes the players feel better because they can just slice through an army of undead or goblins or whatever enemies you're fighting, especially if they're like mooks or minions, nothing too terrible, enough to where they can either provide you as the DM enough action economy, or give your big bads, whoever your spellcaster, whoever the main threat is of the encounter, more time to do what they need to do. And that's what it really comes down to in terms of some of the balancing is action economy. Remember, there are 4 people. If you're big, whoever your main just threat is 1 person. So they get to go once. Before they get to go again, at least 4 people are going before them. So just alone, the players do have an advantage on that. That being said, do not just do something crazy like double the hit points or something like that. That's a bit insane. It's then you have to like start to double everything, because if you make one person have like 400 hit points, then like everything needs to have 400 hit points to kind of make it, I guess, logically fair. It just leads you down a weird path. Another thing you can do is reworking enemies, and this one is a bit trickier and one that probably I wouldn't advise to brand new players, brand new DMs, or especially if you're relatively new to a system. Change an enemy up. I've seen many people do posts online, you know, forums, Twitter, what have you. Of idea that people do is they take the stats of one creature and they put it on a different creature to kind of like reskin it, make it so it gets past the way of the player's metagaming what the creature is, and then you can give you a bit more luxury to kind of tweak it a little bit. Another way you can rework enemies, especially if you have 6 players or more, is changing what weapons they have. Maybe that +1 weapon, maybe they normally have just a regular like +1 weapon. Now they have +1 flaming weapon. Now they're suddenly doing additional damage with every hit. Maybe they get an additional ability. One thing I like doing is reworking spells. I look at spell lists for some of the spellcasters in an adventure path, and if I don't feel like it's good enough, or in my opinion challenging enough, I might tweak it a bit. If they have like one high level spell and it's a spell that I feel like wouldn't impact this party as much as I think, maybe tweak it to something that would be cool, And it's also good if it's like at something like those level milestones. The first time the players see a flame strike, the first time Phantasmal Killer comes out, or the first time, Chain Lightning or Feeble Mind comes out, the players start to know that they are in those territories of like spells. That has more of an impact than a spell that, like a 6th level harm spell, or like a 7th level fireball. Like, yeah, that's cool, but give it a little bit more flavor. But in terms of balance, it is, you want to test the party enough so that they feel that satisfaction of winning the encounter. Now, you may have a party that just kind of wants to just slice through everything and they enjoy that. Fine, okay. But I like to kind of give my party a bit of a challenge. So, either give them like I said, buff the stats, give the elite adjustment is a good way to do it. Maybe increase the change the spell selection, change what weapons they might be using, that kind of stuff. The last bit of information is the actual battle itself. Now, what I mean by this is using the environment and precasting. For the love of God, I do not care what you are. If you have a spellcaster and they have a bunch of spell buffs, please don't cast them during the combat. Just don't. You cannot afford to have your spellcaster spend 3 turns buffing themselves, wasting those turns, while the party just gets to beat on them for free. Now, if it's a specific spell that makes, that lasts like 10 minutes, that lasts a few rounds, those, they probably have to do pretty, like, beginning, like, during combat or beginning of combat. Those, okay. But if it's a spell that lasts hours, 8 hours, a day, just don't. I don't care if you have to like mentally say that they heard them fighting in the next room over, or some scout alerted them to them, so they started precasting and buffing, what have you. You were just killing that character if they spend 4 turns buffing themselves. And that's all they do. By the time they get all the spells out, they are probably at half health and are surrounded and have no place to go. And then that encounter is trivial. The last thing about it is the environment. Using the environment to not only A, make the combat more interesting, but B, to enhance or kind of make things either better or worse. Lighting is a big thing, you know. Make sure, you know, if people have dark vision, making sure there's no lights in the area so people can't see. Maybe go into the shadows so concealment comes into play. Using obstacles to kind of block or deter the fighter or whatever melee character from getting in range right away. Having someone attack from from a platform up above that had with a bow, so you have a range attack while they're having this fight in the middle. These are all different ways you can have people attack, you know. Don't be afraid to use the environment, and while you do have the book kind of tells you some things, sometimes you have to, sometimes you have to go with it and kind of deviate a little bit to make it more interesting, especially because sometimes the book doesn't give you all the answers. I've learned from playing of these past campaigns, 2 things you should know in general is what's the lighting in the area and how high are the ceilings. Just know that. There's a good chance someone's going to ask. Either they're going to be flying, they're going to be jumping, they're going to be summoning something, they're going to shoot a spell up in the air, they're going to do something. That's what the players do. Know that. Spider climb is a great way. Have your spellcaster, remember that we just talked about, cast spider climb, and maybe now they're hanging from the ceiling, casting the spells down. That's a great way for them to be effective without being completely bulldozed over. And it's within practicality, like you didn't break anything. They have the spell on the spell list. There were spellcasters, so they probably have some form of intelligence enough to like know how to use their spells. So it's a good strategy. The last part, and this is a bit of a caveat for this environment thing, is if you're playing an adventure path or a campaign, sometimes you're going to have to do your own map layout. What I mean by this is I've had a few times in my campaigns where the map that they give you just doesn't make sense. And this is usually for like when you have large, huge creatures, or even sometimes not. Sometimes you have a small room that's like a 4x4 room, and there's like 3 enemies plus a party of at least 4. Say you have 5, so 8 enemies, so 8 people within a 4x4 cube, a 4x4 square, is very crowded. There's no place to move. Spells become a nightmare. Open it up. Make it into an 8x8 or make it 6x6, whatever. Even if that's not the dimensions of the room as written, make it so that it actually makes sense for the group. And if you have a party of 6, 7, 8, which is a bit crazy, but if you do, you may have to do this a lot more often, not just for making the combat interesting, but just so everybody can fit in the room. Because it's a bit insane. You have 8 people and then you have like 5 creatures. That's 13, bodies moving around. Plus, in a room that's supposed to be like a living room, can you fit a dozen people in your living room without like it being a bit crowded and a bit hard to get around, it might not be that easy. Plus furniture, which you may or may not actually like take into account and use for the environment. So sometimes it's going to be a bit of a rework you have to do, you know, use some sort of map editing program. There's a bunch of them out there to kind of tweak that. So that's one last way you can kind of like do it if the map itself doesn't cooperate with what your party does. With that being said, these are just, again, some few ideas I've had for balancing encounters, kind of how to balance stuff. So let's quickly recap it as we wrap up this video. 1, use the game's adjustments if they have one. Weak, elite, you know, grip mode, whatever different type of adjustments they may have. 2, HP versus more mobs. Generally lean towards the more mobs way, just to make it a bit more fun and engaging than having a one big damage sponge. Rework your enemies if you have to, you know, give them better weapons, give them better gear, better spells, so forth, especially if you have a party, like I said, of 6 or more. Definitely do that. And make sure your spellcasters are precasting when they can, and use the environment and enforce the environment as well. Don't be afraid to, you know, check those lighting and be like, well, wait a minute, actually it's pitch black here, so you can't actually see what you're aiming at. Or, well, I know there's a window over there, so I can actually force push you out the window to watch you plummet to your death. So don't be afraid to use the environment to help the encounter. Thank you all for watching this video, and be sure to check out the rest of my videos. I have, at this point, the first 3, and then I'll be uploading this one as well as the last 3, which go into foreshadowing, burnout, and of course, the BBEG. Thank you.